Hello, everyone. I am Akofa Dosu, Director of Economic Research at the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. Our organization covers 15 counties in North Carolina and South Carolina. We provide support by sharing insight with our business partners and our investor in the overall business community in the Charlotte region. Our insights are mainly on marketing, economic research, talent, advocacy, and business recruitment. Today, I am here with Paul Brogan, Vice President of Client Services at ROI. Paul is here to share his insights on foreign direct investment during this challenging time of COVID-19. Paul, welcome.
Please Thanks very much, Akofa. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks, very happy to join you. I'm Vice President Client Services at ROI Research On Investment up here in chilly Montreal. Very happy to talk to you about the topics we have in line today. At ROI, we're an economic development consulting firm. We offer a range of services to economic developers around the world, and certainly this is a hot topic right now.
That is great. Thank you so much for that, Paul. So let's dive right into it. My first question to you, what were the main markets for FDI into the Southeast prior to the COVID-19? Has this changed? And if so, what are the main markets now?
Yeah, so traditionally, FDI into the Carolinas and the Southeast in general has been led by countries like Germany, the UK, Canada, China, Japan, Switzerland. So they've been traditionally over the past, decade or so the largest investors into the region. Has it changed? It's kind of too early to tell. All this is quite new. It's hard to know, what the changes will be. Obviously people are speculating, there could be changes coming out of Asia. Are European markets going to hunker down? So really, too hard to tell if it's changed or if it will be changing. I think when we look 3 to 6 to 9 months out from now, we may see a different trend. It could be up or it could be down, but right now a little too early to tell on those kind of trends.
Okay. And what do you think are the main markets now?
So right now, again, geographic markets, it's hard to tell. I think Canada is, always going to be a strong investor in the US. However, if we look at Asia Pacific and Europe, it's really going to be challenging to see, how those markets are going to react to what's happening. Are they going to look to a major market like US for more growth? That could lead to an increase in FDI into the US and the Southeast, or they may, try and, circle the wagons, for want of a better term, to really try and just focus and grow their domestic markets.
Yeah, thank you for that insight, Paul. So when these challenging times of COVID-19, when all of this ends, what do you think will be the main driving factors for FDI around the world?
So I think it's a very good question. And again, it really does depend, what level of a recession are we going to be going into here? The main driving factors, ultimately for most FDI projects right now are, stability, market stability and market size. It's one of the reasons the US has historically been the biggest, attractor of foreign direct investment. It's got a huge, stable, politically stable and economically stable domestic market. So I think, that's going to continue to be a trend, which countries, adapt quickest and which countries react quickest to what's happening right now, who is going to have the quickest economic turnaround. Obviously we look at China is already starting to bounce back. If this is a prolonged event in North America or in the US, for example, it may give China maybe a little bit of a head start. However, ultimately, I do think, having a strong economic base, and, if the US can respond well to this and the economy can bounce back, it'll still be well placed. I think, workforce and talent is always a factor for companies when they're investing. We're going to be looking at, probably unprecedented unemployment levels. So that kind of labor crunch that we saw over the past few years in the US, this could potentially, for want of a better term or a better way of putting it, it may flood the market in some industries with, qualified employees. So I think that could, give certain countries or regions an edge depending on how severely they're impacted.
Okay, thank you. And right now, there is one relevant topic that keeps coming up is about supply chain. Mm-hmm. And how has COVID-19 disrupted the supply chain on the FDI side? And how should we prepare to assist companies on supply chain now and when the market settles down?
Yeah, very good question. I think, the supply chain issues are very well talked about. There's a lot of, very good information out there, a lot of really good content. I think it really depends, on the industry and the companies. But I think everybody's being impacted to some degree. With it first happening in China, again, it's a huge supplier to the US market in a lot of different industries. So, I've read interviews with different CEOs and our team has had, conversations with business leaders where, they felt an impact from that, but it's kind of trickling its way through now where they're having to slow down their orders. I've seen interviews with CEOs where they said, look, we had 2 or 3 containers that were on a ship when China shut down. So we're good for a couple of months, but it's going to trickle down in the next couple of quarters. What we're going to see now in the US and North America in general, and Europe, is these general lockdowns of industry, across these really, well-developed manufacturing markets. This is going to have a longer term impact, I think. With the manufacturing being shut down essentially in many states, this is going to have an impact on manufacturers across the country. Maybe they're not feeling it now because they have stock in place and they'll be able to ramp up once they get going. But if we see a staggered, release from these lockdowns, like let's say, for example, North Carolina comes out of lockdown quicker than California or New York, there could be companies that have interconnected supply chains there that are impacted more than others. How could, an organization assist its businesses? Really trying to understand where they are right now. Are they feeling a crunch in their supply chain? If so, where? Are there any local players that can fill that gap? So really having a strong understanding of your local base, not just what are their current products they're producing, but what could they produce that could fit a local gap in the chain. So I think the key part to that is having a strong understanding and knowledge of your local base to find out, are there any gaps that can be filled, internally or maybe from a neighboring state. So there's less reliance maybe on shipping from Italy or Germany or China or Japan.
Okay. Those are very great points. And let's talk a little bit more about manufacturing. And this question may be a little bit more specific related to manufacturing. So how will raw materials play a role in FDI investment for manufacturers?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be very important. Again, there's certain things you can't really control. If the stock of oil that you need is in Texas, that's kind of where you're going to want to be, or you're going to be need to be close to it at the very least. But I think it's probably going to be something that more investors are going to be putting a closer eye on. I think when they make these investments, tied into that is the supply chain story. In that having access to the processor of the raw materials is definitely going to be important. But yeah, I think being close to raw materials, especially those that have been heavily impacted. I know energy resources have been hit really hard lately. So anyone in the chemicals, petrochemicals are certainly going to be looking at, oh, do I need to be closer to these raw materials than I currently am, because shipping lanes are being, messed up. We're having global transport and freight is being impacted due to these lockdowns. So I think it will, certainly play a bigger role in future FDI decisions. But again, ultimately, investors always look at the big picture, the larger scope. They're also going to still be looking at workforce. They're going to be looking at infrastructure and other assets like that as well. Yeah. So I think it'll have an increased role maybe, but I don't think it'll be overstated.
Yeah, that's understandable. And to go a little bit further, well, how important will it be for communities to revise their incentives for FDI investment as we are going through all of these changes?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I think when you look at, what's driving investment, from companies into regions, studies like the A.T. Kearney Confidence Index usually puts incentives around, the 8th or 9th or 10th factor that comes into a company's decision-making process. So while they're definitely important, they're never really, a huge deal breaker for a company. If you've got the full package of, resources, the cluster, the infrastructure, the talent in place, incentives can certainly be a sweetener to help it get across the line. But I think, because it's a relatively low on the totem pole, I don't think there should be a huge rush to really assess these kind of incentive packages. Maybe if there was something to come in line to perfectly address this kind of situation in the future, and, you can talk about how, when that COVID-19 was an issue last year, after that, we put into place a special program to help support our existing businesses. So as opposed to a attraction method or an attraction tool, it's a business retention and an expansion tool, and it's another part of your armory. So as opposed to putting in place new incentive programs, if you can consider putting in, what are you doing right now to support your businesses? So this is going to be on people's minds for a few years now, I think. Yeah. And if we can talk about, okay, when these disasters happen, we had the resources in place to help them find export markets. We had supply chain support. The federal government had, these incentive packages in place. So I think really talking about that kind of reaction, and as opposed to developing new incentive plans, it will probably be the best way to go forward.
All right, that's very good, and you brought a lot of different points and great insights to the overall view of what is happening right now in the world and in FDI due to COVID-19. And my last question to you will be, what do you think, will FDI play a more or less significant role in economic development going forward?
It's a good question. It's a tough one to answer. Yeah. I've thought about this one quite a bit. I think, look, it's always going to play a role, and it's something that I talk about to colleagues and clients and partners, in that, foreign direct investment is really, it's one part of any local economy. It's never going to be the largest part, or very rarely it'll be the largest part of the local economy. Ultimately, foreign direct investment comes in and it can spur and add an extra element to a local economy, bring in, foreign funds and new ideas into an economy. Do I think it'll play, more significant role? It really remains to be seen. How are things going to shake out over the next 3 to 6 months? How bad will, this recession be? Is it really going to cause companies to shrink and go out of business? There's always going to be some winners that are going to be looking to grow and expand as well. So I think it's a difficult one to answer, to be honest. It's a good question. It's a difficult one to answer, but I think it'll still play a role. I don't think it's going to be less significant, but will it be more significant? I'm not sure. I think a lot of economic developers are going to spend a lot of time really refocusing on their business retention and expansion efforts as well. And I think the foreign direct investment side of it is certainly going to also be important. but it's just a big part of the jigsaw puzzle.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul, for your time. And this concludes our first talk in a two-part series on FDI and the role of economic development organizations in these challenging times of COVID-19. Please join us also next week when we talk to Paul again about the role of our economic development organization and how they can help our partners around the world or in the shallow region, as well as how they can strategize and bring new insights and perspective as we are going through these challenging times. Thank you so much. Take care and stay safe. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
You too.